Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. This is the Business Day Spotlight, your destination for African business made simple. My name is Mudiwa Gavaza, and for today, we get into a conversation that we've had on this platform a number of times. We often use a number of different words, around this topic. Sometimes we talk about accelerators, sometimes we talk about incubators, sometimes we talk about small business development, sometimes we talk about venture capital. Sometimes we talk about people that are investing in small to medium enterprises. All of these, various terms are all in line with how do we push the country's small business sector, entrepreneurs. How do we make sure that we are putting enough resources behind, some of the country's, businesses, especially people that are coming up with solutions, to some of the big problems and challenges that are facing people on a daily basis. So for today we are talking to the team from the SAB Foundation, that is specifically Bridgit Evans, who is the executive director for the SAB Foundation, and gonna be trying to see what is the recipe for success behind SAB Foundation's social innovation programs. They just released an interesting report that I've had some opportunity to go through, and we're just going to be walking through some of the things that they are doing and what's going on their end. So Bridgit, greetings to you today.
Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
No. Thank you so much, for being with us today, Bridgit. You heard me throwing around a number of different terms at the beginning there, and I threw them around on purpose because, whenever I look at the SAB Foundation's mandate, because we've had opportunity to chat to, one or two people from the foundation. I believe back in the day we talked to, Zenzele Kabili, around the foundation, some time back, but familiar with what it does, and it almost feels like it encompasses a number of the terms that I threw around. So for yourself as the executive director, how would you describe the SAB Foundation within the context of all of these various terms?
I think we're a combination of things. I think it is holistic, I would say, entrepreneur development. So that means skills training, it means mentoring, it means access to funding and finance, and like helping with access to market. So it's kind of everything. And yeah, the intention is to make sure that the entrepreneurs that we work with can grow, and they have the necessary skills to grow a business. So it's all of those things. I think we're not a physical space, so people don't, and it's because we have a very national focus. And in fact, we actually really go out of our way to find businesses outside the metropolitan areas. So we have a lot of businesses from small towns and rural areas. And so the way that we kind of work with them is we bring them all together a couple of times, like 5 times. But then a lot of the work is actually done with their mentors online, so that they don't have to leave those businesses, because they can't afford, most of them, to actually not be in the business for a long time.
And it's actually very true what you're saying, Bridget, because a lot of entrepreneurs get onto, these programs, and they come in various guises, like what we say. But for an entrepreneur to really make the most of it, they have to invest the time, to either take on the mentorship, the workshops, the learnings, whatever it is. But most of the time, that entrepreneur is HR, marketing, finance. They are everything, usually in their business. So the time spent trying to improve themselves might sometimes be seen as, time being taken away. So from that point of view, it becomes important for us to then define impact, right? Because the report that you guys have recently brought out is around impact, of your various programs. So maybe where I want to begin is, how do you guys define impact before we start talking about the measuring of the impact and that type of thing, right? Because we before we measure something, we must know what exactly are we measuring. So in your universe, I think before we started recording, you were telling me you've been at this for a decade now, so you must have a pretty strong sense of what impact and success means to you. So maybe you could walk us through what does impact mean from an SAB Foundation point of view, and how do you then measure that?
Yeah, so we kind of have, I suppose, three key areas. It's actually it's pretty simple to measure the impact, because the business either grows or it doesn't. And so, like, growth in turnover, jobs created, jobs sustained as well, because a lot of businesses have hit a lot of tough times over the years, with electricity crises and COVID and all sorts of things. So the fact that they're able to sustain jobs is also important. And then obviously it's a growth in their turnover. And then over and above that, we have two kind of areas that we focus on. The one is straight entrepreneurship. The other one is, as you mentioned, social innovation. And for those businesses, each of them is trying to solve a social problem of some kind, whether it's health, in the health sector, education, farming. And so with those, it's really measuring the social impact that the work that they're doing has had. And so we track the social impact that they're having. The challenge is that it's so diverse, because each of them are doing so many different things, that you actually have to record it as individual impact for each business. And I think that is why on this year's report, you will see that we actually, for the first time, really documented the impact that these businesses are having, because it's very significant, in the different fields that they're operating in. If you add it all together, it's hugely transformative, and it affects, I would say, 100,000 people, so or more. So it's that part of it is very interesting to track as well. So that really is impact for us. Are those key things: turnover, job creation, and then the social impact of the innovation that they are working on.
And within that context, what do you think has made this year's report perhaps different, or stand out from other years? Because every year you're going out, you're doing these studies, you're looking at your various programs, you're looking at this impact that you're making. But for this season, I'm not sure what we call it, because on the report itself, I believe we call it Impact Report 2024. But in that context, then, what do you think has made this one stand out and different from some of the other years?
So the other years, we have really kind of just given a list of the social impact of what we have done. But this year, for the first time, we put a lot of energy and work into actually graphically representing the social impact under the different sustainable development goals. So that's what's different, because now it demonstrates how comprehensive the impact actually is when you document it like that. So in the past, we just kind of had a list of different impacts, which is not helpful because people don't read it, and it kind of minimizes what effect these innovations are having on the country, So we really wanted to document it much more effectively. So that's what we've done differently this year. I think an important thing to mention as well is that we track impact. We track their performance for 5 years after they exit the program. So we're not just saying, look, there's this amazing improvement while they're on the program, because also what they do is we give them a small cash injection when we work with them to try and catalyze some fast growth. So it's normally investment in equipment and other things. So you can't then think, oh, wow, look at the growth in their turnover in this year, because that would naturally happen. But what you need to see is that growth sustained over a long period of time? Because the entrepreneur is also getting a whole lot of skills to help improve the way they're running that business. So you can't, you really have to look at, okay, so what happens after you exit? So that's why 5 years.
I often tell the story that when I started out doing what I do, covering technology, media, and telecoms, a big piece of this area is the startup space and what some people call enterprise supply development. Some people call it, just business development. All of these different terms, together with all the other terms that are used at the beginning. And one of the first investigations I ever did many, many years ago was that there are a lot of these programs and entrepreneurs are joining. And the criticism that came out of there was, I spoke to a number of small business owners who had been part of these programs, and they felt that they were hardly benefiting, from this, and that the money would stay with the organizations and the consultants and all of this stuff. So I'm very happy, to hear the fact that you are in a situation where you're telling us that you are measuring, the progress of these businesses beyond their time, with the SAB Foundation. And with that in mind, are you able to give us a sense of how many businesses you've been able to support, during your tenure?
Yes. So we've worked with about 3,900 businesses, about around 4,000 entrepreneurs. And then also we've also worked with some micro enterprises, like close to 4,000 micro enterprises as well. And then over and above that, 326 on our social innovation programs. So it's quite significant in terms of numbers.
That's roughly 8,000 or so?
Yeah, altogether, yeah.
And would you have examples within that 8,000, just around some of the businesses that you would say, okay, fine, these are good examples of, I guess, tangible impact based on what we were talking about earlier on?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just give you two quick examples. So we launched a loan fund 2 years ago. So anyone who's graduated from any of our programs is able to then apply for a loan. These are not interest-free loans, but they are very concessionary. So interest rates between prime -2 and prime, roughly. And we have now taken 34 graduates of our previous programs and put them onto one of these, supported them with a loan fund. So we had an entrepreneur that was on one of our big programs, and their monthly turnover when they joined our program was 6,000 Rand a month. And I think they employed around 3 or 4 people. And then post the program, they employed, their turnover was 70,000 Rand a month, and they employed 8 people. And now their turnover is 600,000 Rand a month, and they employ 15 people. So that's been quite a dramatic growth and increase for that particular business. And we have lots of stories like that. For the social innovation work, we're not necessarily, we're not as focused on jobs, even though there is a lot of job creation. We're really trying to see if they the problem they're trying to solve if they can scale the business to the point where they can address that problem at scale. So, I mean, just a simple example would be an entrepreneur that he does prosthetics. He does a silicone lining for prosthetic legs. And in South Africa, the only silicone lining is imported and very, very expensive. So most people who have amputations can't afford that product. They then get a very inferior product, which is like a sock that goes under their prosthetic leg, and it's very abrasive, so it causes a lot of injuries and sores and things like that. And then, so this locally produced silicone liner is going to be a game changer because it's so much cheaper and so much more comfortable for our local population than an imported one, which is completely prohibitive from a cost point of view. So, yeah, so that's like, those are some examples of how innovation and entrepreneurship have significantly changed and really improved how these businesses operate. And in fact, if I look at the overall contribution that these businesses have made, their turnover collectively has gone from about 900 million to 2 billion. So they are now contributing 2 billion to the economy. And overall, we've created around 12,000 jobs. Some of them are informal jobs, but there are a significant number, around 6,000, I think, that are formal jobs, which is really exciting, you know. It's very hard to create a job. I think it's much harder than you think, you know. But so that's the kind of growth that we've seen. So at least we know from an aggregation point of view as well how they've done. But individually, we've got incredible success stories.
One of the things I'm quite curious to get your take on, Bridgit, maybe just as a quick follow-up, right, is this debate that has been raging in social enterprise circles for a long time, because you make a distinction between the businesses that you're supporting, between the ones that are for profit and the ones, like you said, as long as you can see that they're working towards solving that big issue, right? Is it necessarily a bad thing for social enterprises to make a surplus?
No, definitely not. It's not. And social enterprises can be registered as a for-profit or a not-for-profit. And some of them have hybrid structures. They have both. So that's not really the issue. And the reality is that the more surplus they make, the more they can invest into the growth of the business, the more they can solve the problem at scale. So it definitely shouldn't be seen as a bad thing. I know there's a lot of debate that goes on, but, you know, we are the biggest funder of social innovation besides the government in the country. And so we have seen just, you know, a decade of innovation that has come through and what that innovation can achieve if it gets to scale. And ultimately, the thing as well is that what you want is these innovations to get to a point where they don't need outside money to operate. They don't need grants. They don't need. So the only funding that you hope they're going to need after a period of time is actually maybe equity or, you know, loans or something, but that they are commercial entities. And the thinking underpinning that is that there's been a massive contraction of aid globally. And as you know, what's just happened with Trump. And so we, as a country, are not in a position to criticize an enterprise that's both for good and for profit, because there simply isn't nearly enough grant funding in the world to ever solve the problems that we have in the world. So you have to encourage this kind of innovation because of the promise that it holds to either create a lot of efficiency in terms of how you're addressing problems. Like, for example, we have an innovation called Vula Mobile, and that is it's an online platform that is used amongst doctors, and it allows doctors in rural areas to confer with public sector hospital specialists. So a rural doctor is isolated. They're working by themselves often, and they don't have access to a network of peers if they don't know what something is. So they used to just refer the patient on, and that patient often, because they now have to travel to an urban center, and they don't have the money to do that, so they don't go. So there's lots of challenges around the way the health system currently operates. And so something like that, you can quantify how that efficiency has better patient outcomes, and actually then you have less patients that end up becoming dependent on the state because they weren't treated in time. And, for example, one of the reasons why the entrepreneur started this was because he was a rural doctor, and he referred a patient on with an eye problem to an urban center. She didn't end up going, and she went blind. Now, someone who's blind can't work anymore. Some blind people can work, but now you've got someone who's totally dependent on external support. So creating that efficiency helps everybody. So that's where, innovation is not just, it's about really looking at things in a different way and figuring out how do you reduce bottlenecks in the system and do things more efficiently. Like, there's a lot of educational, supplementary teaching, online tutoring, all sorts of things that are trying to, close gaps in the education system and stuff. So it's important.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And it's a big thing. I remember recently on this platform we actually spoke to some young people, and two of them stand out. Both were from Cameroon, and both are using cold storage because it tends to be in a region where the weather can be hot sometimes. And in one instance, you have one young man who is helping smallholder farmers to say, hey, instead of just sending your produce to the market and it potentially rotting after not being sold, let's use cold storage, and then solar-powered cold storage, so that you can extend the life of your produce. And in the same vein, same solution, which is cold storage, another young man saying, let's see what we can do to keep and refrigerate medicines for a bit longer, because they often go off when they aren't refrigerated properly. And that's actually a problem that a lot of people face. To your point about the doctor, in his case, it was because his mom had a health situation and she couldn't be attended to quickly enough, and that had dire consequences for her. So you do see that a lot of people are coming up with these solutions, but having something sustainable that keeps that thing either going or growing, is a very good thing, like what you were saying. So against that backdrop, then, because you've been at this for a while, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on both the for-profit and, I guess, let's just call it the solutions or social enterprise side. What are some of the things that are holding back businesses from, what's the word I'm looking for, that are holding them back from sustainable growth? Because whether you're for profit or whether you're trying to find a solution, there must be things you guys have noticed that are barriers of some sort to how people can be sustainably, keeping that growth alive.
Yeah. I think access to finance is a big one.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of reasons why businesses need finance. A lot of them, when they get a market opportunity, often what happens is they will have to produce that product, and then deliver that product. So first of all, incur all the costs to produce it, buy all the raw materials, pay the staff, produce it, then deliver it, and then often have to wait 90 days for payment after that. And so a lot of small businesses don't have the cash flow to actually, and they end up running out of cash. And that's a big reason why businesses fail. And unfortunately, a lot of the financing in the country is very, very expensive. It's the interest rates are so high.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
but the flip side of that, and this is something that we've really discovered since we launched this loan fund, which I never realized actually how pervasive this problem is, and that is financial record keeping. So entrepreneurs, so many of them don't keep proper records at all. And what they do is they will outsource their kind of financial stuff to a bookkeeper. That bookkeeper gets paid very little, so it's a very, probably junior bookkeeper, and they only see their job as producing a set of financials once a year. But they don't provide any insight for the entrepreneur into their business. Entrepreneurs tend to focus on what's comfortable for them, and most of the time that's selling. So they sell, but they don't actually know what their profit margins are, and even probably when they're going to run out of cash, a lot of them. So that is a huge issue, not just because it doesn't give them insight, which they really need in their business, but also you are never going to find a lender who is prepared to invest in a business that can't produce financials, management accounts, And I think that is why many of them cannot access normal forms of finance. And then what happens is they will go to those who do accept this as a form of finance, and often that's based on a contract they've got. So like some big retailer gives them a contract, they go to one of these like short-term lenders, and those short-term lenders say, fine, we'll give you the money, but we want 30% interest. And they don't make the profit margins to be able to pay that money back. So that's a major challenge, and I think as a country it's something we need to look at very seriously, because you can't just blame investors for not wanting to invest, because investors have other people's money that they're investing, so they can't afford to take that kind of risk. And then also you've got an issue where there has been a lot of defaults on loans. So again, they are even more cautious because, the chances of them losing that money could be quite high. The other obviously issue is access to markets. But what I found actually is they are hustlers, eh? Flip, they can find a market. I tell you, I'm amazed. The kinds of market opportunities that they manage to, find. But obviously it is a challenge. And because a lot of the businesses we work with are not in big cities, they obviously are not networked like an entrepreneur in a big city would be. But I still have noticed, and I've actually noticed a huge maturing of the sector as a whole, where like 10 years ago, there were no entrepreneurs that we worked with that had contracts with retailers, like big corporates. Now it's very common to see that, but the challenges obviously are the payment terms often. And so I would say like access to markets, access to finance, it's the usual suspects. And then obviously, just having but I find that they survive well. Entrepreneurs survive. They are survivors. It's the growth piece that can be challenging because they're not keeping proper records and they're not able to access finance so like you get a massive order, but you need a R1 million piece of equipment to be able to deliver on that order. And then where do you get the finance from for that?
Yeah, very true. And you've actually hit on a couple of very important points. I've actually spoken to some business people who say, listen, My issue is not even money, right? I just want to access the market. Whereas other people will they'll say, to your last point, they'll literally say, hey, I have this contract, so I have access to market, but I don't have the resources to be able to deliver on the business that's coming to me. And both of them are equally very, key problems that need to be addressed. So from that point of view, what's the recipe from an SAB Foundation point of view in terms of how you structure your programs, the interventions that you're coming up with, and how you guys actually approach solving the challenges that you've just identified?
So we do give them like some, as I say, catalytic funding early on that helps to accelerate their growth. Often it's through pieces of equipment or, like a simple, like you have this, I always am amazed by how entrepreneurs, how they make a plan, even though it's such a struggle for them. Like, for example, you've got someone who's growing vegetables, but they have no access to transporting those vegetables anyway, and they're in some rural area and stuff, and they have to hire a bakkie or so just a simple thing like getting them their own transport dramatically change that business. So all of the ways that we support them are very carefully thought through and done in conjunction with a mentor who actually sits, and they have like a whole investment committee about what would be the most beneficial use of these funds. It's a combination of all the support we provide. And thankfully, we've had a very long-term strategy. And so we're still working with the same support provider that we worked with when I started. We appointed them when I started. And so we're learning together. So every year we make improvements as we think there's certain things we need to address. For example, adding digital sales and digital marketing and how important that now is, and adding this much more robust financial literacy part to the trading. Then the other thing is we don't ever close the door on an entrepreneur. So the program officially ends, but they can come back to us at any time for support. And we really do try and play that mentoring role as long as they need us to. So that's something else. It's not a goodbye and good luck. And then we've added these supplementary things to make sure that we can get them, allow them to take advantage of growth opportunities like the loan fund that we introduced. So that was 2 years ago, and that really accelerates growth. So where you've got fantastic entrepreneurs they really need finance in order to grow, they can apply to us and come back for more finance. And then constantly looking for market access opportunities for them. So like at the moment, we did a big sort of session with the Department of Trade and Industry around exporting, where they were all invited to that. We have a partnership now with Take a Lot, who has really helped businesses to get onto the platform, but also to help them really maximize their presence on that platform so people can find them and stuff like that. So it's very holistic and long-term.
So, as we're landing today's conversation, then, Bridget, you and I have spoken about a number of things throughout today's discussion. You've led us through a lot of the thinking that SAB Foundation is using in terms of crafting its program, some of the problems that you've identified, what the last decade has meant. Your place in the market, being one of the biggest supporters of such enterprises outside of the government, some of the findings, what made this report different, from some of the previous years. So maybe where we can end off is are there any other key findings that you perhaps want to highlight that we hadn't been able to get round to, just so that we can wrap up today's discussion?
That's a hard question. I think one of the key findings for me over the last couple of years is that you can actually lend to the uninvestable, to what the market thinks are uninvestable. It's just how you do it. And for me, it's such a critical issue because there's a lot of narratives around SMEs being the job creators of the future. Everyone thinks they're going to create all the jobs in this country in the future, but if they can't grow, they're not going to create those jobs. And so for all of us as a country, we have to look at how we can learn to invest in businesses that are deemed uninvestable. And that's really what we're trying to demonstrate. So the loan fund is really a pilot, and we're documenting all the lessons that we've learned so that others can copy this fund, and hopefully we can, as a country, start doing more of this kind of lending. Because what we find is, and that's a huge finding for us, is that these entrepreneurs are magic, man. Yes, they do things. I mean, some of them, when you hear where they came from, they do things with impossible odds, and they manage to make a success of it. And the other thing is how much they manage to achieve without outside support. And so for me, like, those factors are absolutely critical when you're assessing a business. Like, this is not an entrepreneur that's a fly-by-night coming to you for some cheap money or whatever. This is an entrepreneur that has run that business for more than 10 years. And the business is still going. That person is so committed. As you say, they're playing 15 different roles in that company. And so you can't just say, well, look, their finances are not in order, so we can't invest in them. You've got to find other ways to assess, like their character. Who's this person? How's this business been operating for the last 10 years? Because that speaks to their character and their reliability and things like that. It's not just, did they have a loan and did they pay it back, like a credit history or something. So I think that's what's been so exciting about the loan fund, and that's what I would love others to start asking those same questions of themselves, like, how can we do this? Because it's essential for job creation, and that's, I think, it's our most critical challenge in the country. So.
All right. So that ability to be able to invest in what many would, deem the uninvestable rather. That's where we end off today's discussion. It has been a really great one, just talking to Bridgit and just gleaning some of the insights, from about, I think she said 11 years, being the executive director and just, seeing all of these different programs through, just understanding the report that they've just brought out. We began the conversation outlining what is impact. Right. And she actually gave us a number of different metrics. So, for example, and they delineate between what would be considered typical for-profit businesses. Are you growing your turnover? That type of thing. Whereas on the other side, for businesses that are more on the social side and impact side, like how far have you gotten in terms of actually, addressing a particular challenge? How many people are you impacting? Those are some of the things that she was talking about. Gave us a sense of what made this year's report different from some of the previous years, as well as giving us some insight into what's going on, when it comes to these two different sides, for-profit, not-for-profit, and we got into that debate, around making these sustainable business models, especially for some of the big issues that need to be addressed, in society. But more than anything else, she did just give us some insight into some of the things that are holding back sustainable business models overall. Whether you're for profit or you're solving a big societal issue, it's access to funding, it's access to markets, And one of the other big ones that she spoke about is keeping, straight and good financial records, in place, so that people can be able to gear and scale that business to the next level. Ending off talking about, how they've then approached their programs, to say with all of these challenges in place, how are they structuring their programs to actually make sure that things go on, and then ending off with some of the other key findings. And some of the one that she ends off with is to say that it's very possible to invest in the uninvestable. So that's where we end off, and today's discussion, it has been a really great one with the executive director for the SAB Foundation, that is Bridgit Evans. Bridgit, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mudiwa.
And that's been it for this edition of the Business Day Spotlight. Remember that you can find our latest podcasts on Business Live. That's under the podcast Business Day Spotlight tab. On Twitter, we're #BD Spotlight. And remember that you can review and subscribe for free on iono.fm, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, or wherever you choose to get your pods casted. Thank you to our amazing team. I've been Mudiwa Gavaza of the Business Day and Financial Mail. This has been another edition of the Business Day Spotlight, which is a multimedia live production. So from myself and the rest of the team, it is a good evening, good afternoon, and good morning.